This is a rebuilding project of a Marco Phoroptor arm. Originally, the defect I was expecting was one of these springs was broken because it wouldn't hold up its weight, but as it turns out, one of the springs was detached, not broken. Once I got the arm apart, what I found is that this bracket was also broken, so it made for a very wobbly arm. I then obtained a matching replacement bracket where I can transfer over all the parts. Now there's a snap ring which is not on the bottom of this shaft. I think it popped off during a disassembly process when I did this before. But the snap ring fits into this groove once it's put back together again. Now typically before removing these screws, you need to loosen the, there's a set screw in here which goes at right angles to this screw, and if it's tightened up and you try to force this out, you strip the threads on the screw. So the first step is to loosen this, but I knew I'd already taken this apart, and these two screws were already loose. These are metric Allen head wrenches. Now this has a central shaft which goes through this core, and these screws end up going through this, the hole on both sides when it's put back together again. Now when I first took this apart, I had a significant difficulty getting off the washer. So there's a washer, a bearing, and then there's a surface inside here that the bearing rides on. Same thing on the other side, the bearing, the washer. I'm not re-lubricating these because I had already lubricated them when I had it apart earlier. And a fairly tight fit. And there is definitely an up and down in this, since this shaft has to go through this. And again, I previously lubricated this when I had it apart. So this is the snap ring that goes in there. I obtained these little snap ring pliers. It seems like the straight-on ones work the best, but the idea is that it stretches the opening and then it slides over the end of the shaft, and that's the idea of getting it back in place. Sort of a tedious process, especially when you don't have gravity helping you. Because when it's on the stand, this is all upside down. And I believe it's in the notch now. This is actually my second attempt on rebuilding this arm. The first time I started rebuilding it, the part I received did not have this big space in here, and it seems that Marco has redesigned this piece so that it also goes with a pneumatic arm, whereas this is a totally mechanical one. And what's necessary is to have this space in here to be able to adjust the tension on this spring, which is actually, there's a head right here that you can adjust the tension of it once the arm is assembled and back on the stand. But the original part that had to be sent back was missing this space. You couldn't fit a set screw, an Allen screw, through this space once it was reassembled. Well, it's been so long since I took this apart, I don't really remember how the set screw fits. So I'm going to have to guess. And by trial and error, when I put it back together again, I'll find out how accurate I was in my guess. But I'm sure it's to get this piece flush with both sides of the bracket and then tighten it into place. The reassembly of these springs is particularly puzzling, that they only go together one way, so it's a matter of figuring it out. Now in the reassembled configuration, it's important that this Allen wrench can fit into the screw head to counterbalance this spring, and similarly there's a second spring on this side which will line up once there's weight on the Phoroptor arm. This screw head will line up for tightening as well. But right now there's no weight on it, and it's got the wrong angle. Similarly, this can be turned either way with the shaft on this side, or popping out this piece of metal and putting the shaft on this side. Now the way this tightens is there's a set screw on one side and the screw on the other. And the idea is to tighten up the screw with the set screw screwed out slightly. And then back it off a little bit and tighten the set screw so it goes into the end of the screw of the large screw. So in the assembled configuration, the center screw is free to turn, but it doesn't have looseness or wobble to these two side plates. Now this the outside grease can be cleaned off with paper towels and then finally with alcohol, so the doctor won't be getting grease on his or her hands while operating the Phoroptor mechanism. So this has to be cleaned further after it's reassembled in the stand. Now the adjustment of the Phoroptor arm is actually these two screws. When it's pulled tight against this fitting, it will stop it in its motion. So these two screws actually pull the cylinder up against this mechanism. This is sort of an oval-shaped hole, and you can actually see how this shaft moves closer as you tighten the screw. And then it gets to a point where it's snugging up against it. Then when you have the weight of the Phoroptor on this, you can fine-tune it so that it tightens but not slips around, and that it tightens without bouncing back. And it's a matter of having the tension on these screws to the proper amount, so that it's between those two extremes. And then it's also keeping them even on both sides. And once you get that setting, what you do is tighten the set screw, which tightens it up against the side of the screw so it doesn't lose that setting. Then the final piece of the Phoroptor arm fits onto this with the shinier version of the 4mm headed screws. This pole comes in a standard version and a longer version, depending on the distance between the ophthalmic stand and the patient chair. If the two are further apart, you need a longer version. And if they're fairly close together, you use a shorter version. And this has a certain amount of play to it, so that depending on, you can re-level it a little bit more by changing the tilt of these two screws once you got the Phoroptor in place. This then goes over the Phoroptor pole, and this has to be loosened in order to slide it over, and then you tighten it in place.